beer of the week this week is Corona. And it's Corona because the Panthers are going to be the kings of the NFC South this season.
Hopefully that take doesn't come to bite us in our butt. But this is Purrfect Takes. I'm Stephen Patton, your host, joined by my co-host and friend Jacob Acquire. We're going to be breaking down the NFC South. We saved it for last because we find it fond and dear to our hearts because of the Carolina Panthers. And we'll start in order in which we play these teams, and that means we're starting in Atlanta.
Yep, we're going to be playing Atlanta in Atlanta week 1. And I think we all know what happened the last time Bryce was in that stadium. But I digress. I think we're going to get a good look at the Falcons nice and early. And I'm looking forward to see if Ritter, if he's just as bad as Mariota was last year, or if he can improve just a little bit. Even with Ritter and his faults or highs and lows, the Falcons have spent a lot of top 10 picks the past couple seasons on weapons for Ritter to hand the ball off or throw to. They spent a 4th overall pick on Kyle Pitts 3 years ago, Drake London 2 years ago with the 8th pick, and Bijan Robinson with the 8th pick this past year. And I think all 3 of those guys can really insulate whoever the QB is and really make up one of the more dynamic and athletic trios of skill position players across the entire league.
Which exactly fits what Arthur Smith is trying to do. He loves having a balanced approach, and he showed that last year with a 58% pass rate out of 11 personnel and a 52% pass rate out of 12 personnel. It was 46 in 21 personnel, but there's a lot of people that tend to run more in 21 rather than 12 and 11. And I think with Bijan and Matthew Bergeron, those 2 additions, the team's going to operate a lot better in 12 and 21, which should open up the passing game even more and hopefully give Ritter more open targets to throw to throughout the year.
Yeah, I thought Ritter had a pretty good chance of being an NFL QB coming out of Cincinnati a couple years ago. He was the quarterback when they were the 12-0 Cincinnati team that made the college football playoff, first G5 team to ever make the playoff, and then it just kind of fell flat there. I thought his biggest issue coming out of Cincinnati was his consistency. He would make really good, really smart plays like on first and second down, and then on third down he would just dirt the ball or throw it behind the receiver. And it wasn't always third down where he would do that, but it just seemed like every 4 to 5 downs, something was just off. And looking at the 4 starts he had last season, it seems like that problem didn't really improve. And we kind of joke, and I know we hate the Falcons a good bit, and we kind of joke on Twitter where they hide their QB in a lot of their posts. Like you never see when the DB was making picks in training camp, you would never see who threw him the ball.
Smitty got
Yeah,
on some of those Falcons accounts. He was like, "Why aren't you showing the quarterback? We know who's throwing
yeah.
the ball there."
Hashtag show that QB. So I wouldn't say that Ritter has drastically improved in camp and like granted it's still preseason and stuff, but I wouldn't say he's improved upon the mistakes that I was hoping for, and I'm guessing the Falcons brass was hoping for coming into a second year.
Absolutely. And if Ritter doesn't pan out, I think a lot of questions start surrounding how they built this team up. That you wasted resources with Pitts and Bijan from a position standpoint. You used top 10 picks on non-premium positions, and you passed on guys like Jamar Chase, Penny Sewell, Patrick Surtain in 2021. And their secondary, I mean, if you had another lockdown corner besides AJ Terrell, like you're taking strides on that side of the ball. And then this past year, you pass on Jalen Carter and Christian Gonzalez, 2 guys that could have bolstered kind of your defensive line or your back end. And it's one of those things that you're not getting as much value as you could be, and you could be spending kind of some of the free agent money that they have on tight ends and running backs. So a lot of this stems from the fact that Arthur Smith, he was an offensive assistant to Mike Munchak and Ken Wisenhunt, and that was before he became an offensive coordinator for Mike Vrabel. He loves running heavier personnel sets. He was a tight ends coach with Tennessee, and that had a major influence in drafting Pitts. But you can't let some of those personal biases impact how you build a team. And I think that's what happened here in Atlanta.
Yeah, I agree. I had Bijan, I think, as the third best player coming out of this past draft. He's an excellent talent, but they were already a pretty good running game this past year. I believe Tyler Algier last year as a rookie had over 1,000 yards. They had Caleb Huntley, who was a rookie who did well. Cordero Patterson, he was in and out, and he's getting up there in age, but he was still effective when he was on the field. I get taking Bijan and Pitts as the extreme athletes and high ceiling guys, but like you said, I think the value may not have been there. But at least on the offensive line, the past few years, they have invested high draft picks and high free agent contracts or extensions. But I wouldn't say that that unit inspires as much confidence as being portrayed when it comes to how much they're spending on them.
Yeah, you have Jake Matthews. I think you just extended Chris Lindstrom this offseason. I get the vibes of like the Packers defense when I look at the Falcons offensive line. So the Packers defense, they have 7 first-round picks on their defense, but it's not a top 10 unit. And it's kind of the same thing here with the Falcons. I know there's a lot of different grading scales that do have the Falcons as a top 10 unit, but when we're looking at ESPN pass block and run block win rate, they're below average. And so I'm not exactly understanding the offseason hype and praise, especially when Jake Matthews, Caleb McGarry, Chris Lindstrom, and Dude Dahlman all played over 99% of the offensive snaps last year. So, yes, you're throwing Matthew Bergeron in there. You have a solid starting five. But if you start losing some of those guys to injury, they don't really have the depth. And like I said, they were behind the Panthers and Saints in some win block categories. And so when you don't have the best offensive line, you're relying on some of these offensive skill players, and you're half baked on the defensive side of the ball in terms of the pieces that you have, it makes it really hard to make a push for a division title, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think the damning stat there is that those four linemen outside of Bergeron all played 99% or more of the offensive snaps last season, and they finished below halfway in both pass block and run block win rate, 19th and 25th respectively. So it's kind of like how much better can they get? Like I know Bergeron was a high pick and a lot of people liked him. He I wasn't like a huge fan of him, but he was definitely like a top 100 player. It's just like how much better can they be? I guess is how I would put it for the O line. But yeah, I
Absolutely. Like
definitely
if
think
we've already kind of seen their ceiling in terms of, hey, this is the group, and we've thrown them out there for 17 full games, like that's probably the best you're going to get.
yeah, and I do think that both the Panthers and Saints have better O lines, and we'll get to that when we get to those teams. But in regards to the Falcons' defense, it doesn't have nearly the amount of early draft capital invested into it the past couple years, but they did invest a lot of money in that defense this past year.
They
This
did.
past year, yeah, past off season, in first year cash, I believe it came just over 66 million for like the impact defenders. I know there are probably a couple of vet mins and training camp
Our
deals
our
there as well.
threshold for this was that they signed a deal worth $2 million or more. So it
Yeah,
kind of takes out your vet min guys. These are guys that are plugging in and probably starting.
yeah. So like Jesse Bates got that huge payday, 23 mil in first year cash. They bring over Onyemata from the Saints, Caden Ellis from the Saints as well. They signed Calais Campbell from the Ravens, who was still pretty effective last year. I believe he was one of the four guys back in the Ravens episode where we were talking about had more than five or more sacks. I believe he was one of them. They
Yep.
bring in Lorenzo Carter, Mike Hughes, and Bud Dupree also on that defensive line. So a ton of money spent on defense this past off season, whereas 2 years ago they didn't really spend anything. So it was good to see that they really invested in shoring up that defense, which was not good at all last year.
Yeah, no, it was abysmal last year. You bring in a new defensive coordinator, you kind of rebolster a lot of units, whether it's the D line or the secondary. But that defensive line, like all of their starters are over 30 years like of age. Like Calais Campbell, 36, David Onyemata, 33, Grady Jarrett, 30, Bud Dupree, 30. All on the back end of their careers. And the only young promising player you have on that defensive line is a third round pick out of Ohio State in Zach Harrison. And great addition. He can set the edge and play until the whistle blows, but he can be a little slow. So trying to get like some edge presence, somebody who can really get after the quarterback, that's what I'm struggling to see on this defensive line. And if quarterbacks can just sit back and kind of tear you apart, that back end isn't necessarily loaded with superstars. AJ Terrell is good, Jesse Bates is good, but there's still a lot of questions around Jeff Okudo. Is Mike Hughes a good slot? Stuff like that, and it's a little concerning.
Yeah, that the young talent on the defensive line and the kind of the second level is kind of lacking, I agree. They do have Troy Anderson, a linebacker from Montana State that was drafted last year. I'm really big on him. I believe he had a 10.0 raw score. He just kind of did everything when he was in college. He was running back. He filled in for quarterback when they needed him to, and hopefully he'll take the leap. I really wanted the Panthers to draft him a couple years ago, but yeah, that D line is old for sure. And at least the secondary isn't as old as the D line. You know, they bring in Bates, they trade for Akuda, sign Mike Hughes to pair with AJ Terrell. But I'm
Yeah.
still not sold on that secondary as a whole and the defense as a whole. And I think that Dean Pease retiring, granted, he wasn't like the superstar defensive coordinator last year, but he's been in the league a long time and he's called some good defenses in his day, and him retiring also kind of dampens my expectations for this defense as a whole.
I like who they brought in, Ryan Nielsen. He was the Saints defensive line coach last season, and he got the most out of those guys. And if you're going to get the most out of this older defensive line, I feel like this is the guy to do it. But because he has been so heavily focused with more kind of the line play, how good is he in terms of coaching up the secondary? Does he have the right position coaches there to make sure that they're gelling? Because a lot of that's communication on the back end. And so that's where you bring in guys that played with the Bengals and Lions last year. Some of them are familiar with each other. Do they gel? And I think if they gel and he gets the most out of the defensive line, you're looking at an average group. And that's actually pretty solid. Like, I will be impressed if they get there, but it's one of those things, a lot is riding on his shoulder in terms of how he can morph this defense into a team that can push and be competitive in the NFC South.
Yeah, I like that division two or addition rather too. And you see he brought in some of his guys like Anyamata and Caden Ellis. But I think historically, and you kind of talked about this, we've kind of seen that D line coaches don't generally make the best of defensive play callers just because their focus has been on the D line most of their career and just the trench. And they don't, I'm not saying that Nielsen is like this, but they may not be able to see the whole field like a secondary coach would, like a linebackers coach. So I think that's going to be an interesting kind of dynamic how he kind of calls the defenses this upcoming season for them. But as a whole, I like that addition. And I like what the Falcons have done overall this offseason. I think the Falcons could or should maybe be the best team in the division. They brought in, like, now they were, I believe they were fourth last year in the division, so they would be worst to first. And they brought in a bunch of guys on defense, some really premium guys on offense. I think it's just really going to come down to Desmond Ritter's ability to mend the helm on offense, and how is that expensive defense going to complement him? And really, can Ritter just be mistake free, kind of operate like a Shanahan QB would, like just point and throw and get the completion to the really superior athletes?
Absolutely. And that's some of the knock that's been on Ritter is that sometimes his ball isn't as accurate to these guys that are out in open space. So they have to make an adjustment to make the catch. And at that point, you have a defender closing the gap. And all of a sudden, what could have been a 15, 20-yard gain is now like a 5, 10-yard gain. And it's some of those things that I think are going to wear on this offense throughout the season. And I don't think the aging veterans they added on defense is a huge needle mover. And I think they'll end up being the third best team in the division. I think that's fair. I think unless the Saints defense just falls off a cliff, this team is going to look good in certain points, but Ritter was a third round quarterback for a reason. He's slow in his processing and he's not necessarily the most accurate guy out there. And that's going to wear on this team, whether they want to believe it or not in training camp. The narratives that are in August fade really quickly once you hit September, October.
Fair enough. I think we all want to see a QB not overthrow Kyle Pitts, who's the best athlete at tight end ever. Just overthrow him by like 5 feet. If Ritter can complete him the ball, I think we'll all be happy, even Panthers fans like us. But going on to the next team, the team that you think is going to be a bit better, I'm still a bit bearish on them. The Saints. We play them the very next week, week 2 on Monday Night Football. That's actually our first home game. And for some reason, we're not wearing black jerseys and helmets that game, but it's neither here nor there. We'll discuss that when we get there. But the Saints are the odds-on favorite to win the division, and we're going to see them directly after that Falcons game. We actually haven't played in a Monday Night Football game since 2018, where we were playing the Saints,
Oh
and that was a just a
no,
horrendous game.
that was the Bucks. What are you talking about?
That was a
Was
Thursday
that the
night
Bucks?
game. We were at that game. That was a
Oh,
Thursday
you're
night game.
right. Yeah, you are
Yeah,
talking about the Saints. Yeah, I was
yeah,
thinking Thursday night.
and
You're right.
yeah, that Saints game ended 12-9. That was where McCaffrey threw the 50-yard touchdown to Chris Manhertz, and Dante Jackson had the pick two. He picked off Breeze and ran it back during the 2-point conversion. And we lost that game to the Saints, and that was our last Monday night game. So hopefully we'll get some revenge this time. And kind of a good omen on our side is that as a franchise, we're actually 10-7 in Monday night football games, and we've never lost consecutive Monday night football games. So history's on our side. Hopefully we should win this one.
Absolutely. I am sorry for the mix-up. I saw week 2 in the notes, and I was like, no, we
Yeah.
played the Bucks on week 2, but you're right about the
No, yeah, we
Saints.
were
That
we
was
were at that game. Remember, there was like a storm warning. We had to stay inside the concourse, and that was the last hurrah for Cam. Was that game?
that was, and the 12-9 game. I remember that being a slugfest. Cam's shoulder
Hmm.
was at that point gone. Chris McCaffrey threw the touchdown pass, which I think you talked about. So it's definitely been a while since we've had the Monday Night Lights, but we're hosting them here in Charlotte. And my biggest thing is when we're looking at the Saints and they're coming to town is how much of an upgrade is Carr really to Andy Dalton? And that's what's going to be like the resonating question I think throughout is that is he really that much of a needle mover? Is he a Kirk Cousins quarterback? I think Kirk Cousins is definitely better than Andy Dalton, but that's where I think he falls in between those two guys. And if he's not a difference maker, who will be that guy? You have skill players on offense, Michael Thomas, who's been injury prone, and I mean he'll start the year, but we'll see how far that goes. Alvin Kamara serving a suspension, and you have a lot of questions on both sides of the ball in terms of like age. They have a lot of older guys, and you just wonder, is that going to hold together?
Yeah, I definitely think Carr is a better talent than Andy Dalton at the respective points in their careers. But Andy Dalton had a sneaky good season for the Saints last year. I think he was top 10 in EPA, and EPA per play rather. And he didn't really make a ton of mistakes. A lot of his interceptions were like deflections that would just end up in the defender's hands. So he had a sneaky like good year for the Saints. I think Carr's definitely better, but I don't know if he'll match that output and that efficiency. But in addition to Carr, the Saints also brought in Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller, their draft pick from TCU. They can kind of help fill in while Kamara suspended to start the year. I think it's a 3-game suspension, so we won't be seeing him in that Monday Night Football game. But my thing is, Kamara wasn't really great last year,
No,
anyways. He wasn't like he was probably above average, but he wasn't the Kamara of old that was like scoring 6 touchdowns in a Christmas game, or just bouncing off all the defenders. So I I like the Jamal Williams addition, but like I don't think Kamara's I don't think he's a needle mover like you were saying on offense.
absolutely. And he was drafted in the 2017 draft with Christian McCaffrey. Zeke was taken the
Hmm.
year before. We've seen with Zeke in recent years him fall off a cliff. Guys like Dalvin Cook. There is a running back age like curve, and he's starting to hit that. So exactly like you said, even if he comes back off that suspension, how much juice are you going to have? And I think the only hope you can really have in this offensive line, it's their offensive line, and they got average production out of a group that dealt with injuries all year last year. They had Penning out for a while, Andrus Pete, and so when you have some of those starting five out, it kind of impacts your production. And even with that, they were an average group. So, in my opinion, they'll be able to take a step and they could be a formidable starting five, allowing Derek Carr to kind of slice and dice through the defense, especially when you have a guy like Chris Olave on the outside.
Yeah, I think Penning in particular is going to have to take the step. I know he missed a good chunk of his rookie year, so hopefully he's able to really line up with the five that he's with and get a succinct rhythm for his play. But like you said, I love Chris Olave. He's one of my favorite receivers. I thought he was the best route runner in his particular draft. Just one of my favorite young receivers. But outside of him, you're right. I don't have a ton of faith in the pass catchers. Michael Thomas is always a concern. I liked Rashid Shaheed and what he showed last year, but that was just kind of glimpses. He didn't really do it for the full year. And Jawan Johnson, he like quietly had a good year with Andy Dalton, but I don't know how he's going to mesh with Derek Carr. And those guys are the real other big receiving threats. So, like you're saying, outside of Olave, just not a lot of faith in those receiving options.
Yeah, if Jawan Johnson, it really was in terms of like just being in sync with Andy Dalton. They brought in Foster Moreau from Las Vegas,
Hmm.
so I'm not too worried about the tight end position overall. Rashid Shaheed, definitely a analytics darling last year, could take a step, and if he does take a step, having that 1-2 punch with him and Olave would be perfect. Because, like you said, Michael Thomas, until he plays and can actually show that he can stay on the field, like I'm just going to count him out. Like he'll play 2 weeks, he'll be on IR. That is what it is. And then the next thing to also consider, and he showed promises and glimpses in the preseason, is A.T. Perry. So if you can round out a young wide receiving group that's really good, Carr may be able to actually kind of produce. But again, these are all a lot of ifs. If the offensive line stays healthy, if Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry take a step, and it's not a lot of hope, I think, on this side of the ball. It just seems a lot of desperation and grasping to try to make the most of whatever window they feel like they have.
Yeah, it's the classic Saints thing, just trying to stay above water instead of rebuilding like they should. It's kind of similar on the other side of the ball as well. This is also an old defense that lost quite a few players and a position coach this offseason. The defensive line in particular, just like the Falcons, is old as hell. And they also lost their defensive line coach, Ryan Nielsen. He's now the defensive coordinator in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's an old defense. Like where I talked about the age of kind of the Atlanta Falcons starting defensive line, the Saints have 5 projected starters on the defense already over the age of 30. You have Cameron Jordan at 34, Demario Davis at 34, Tyron Matthew at 31, Marcus May and Bradley Roby are also over 30. And then
And
Nathan Shepard.
let me interject real quick. It is cut day. We're recording on a Tuesday. Saints cut Bradley Roby as well, who was one of
Oh,
their
okay.
projected
So,
starters. Yeah.
well, there you go. So, even a guy that was projected to be a starter, I'm guessing there was probably some injury happening. He is older as a cornerback, so maybe they're
Hmm.
thinking they can get a guy out of a late draft pick they've had or undrafted free agent they kind of
They
picked
have
up.
some good young corners that can compete. I think at for the nickel spot.
Absolutely. And if you have that, you already have Lattimore, and Lattimore is under 30, so I'll give them that. They
Hmm.
do have a star on the back end, and that does open a lot of things up in terms of how Dennis Allen can kind of scheme things. Nathan Shepard, they brought in. He'll turn 30 during the regular season. He's an interior defensive line presence, which they need because you lose David Onyemata, Shy Tuttle, Marcus Davenport, and you really don't bring in much to kind of fill in the gap. So it's kind of what are they doing on defense? Are they really going to be able to keep that unit performing above expectation like they have over the past couple of years?
Yeah, for the defensive line in particular, they have Cam Jordan, who's always the stalwart, right? He doesn't seem like he's slowing down anytime soon. Like you said, they bring in Nathan Shepard from the Jets. They brought in Kalen Saunders, I know, from the Chiefs, and then I believe Carl Granderson is going to start opposite of Cam Jordan. Other than Jordan, these are guys that are backups or rotation players that haven't seen like the full starting experience as much as like the Saints D line that they just lost in Onyemata Tuttle, Davenport. Now they did draft some young guys in Brian Brzee and Isaiah Foskey. Hopefully those guys can become something. But yeah, I agree that this the D line is an area of concern for me with the Saints. But I'm actually kind of high on their secondary and their linebacking unit. Like I know Demario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu are older, but they do have Lattimore. They do have some good young corners and Alante Taylor and the guy from Stanford a couple years ago, Paulson Adebo, that should be able to compete for the corner two and nickel spot. So I think they're going to be good, but I do think that D line is going to be the crux, like the area of concern for them, especially after losing their position coach as well. But I do still like this defense better than the Falcons as a whole. But yeah, that D line is still concerning.
I mean, this was a team that finished dead last in pass rush win rate last year, and then lost three players on the defensive line who played at least 40% of the defensive snaps. And it's not like they let those guys go and they brought in these all stars or they drafted a stud in like Tyree Wilson or somebody to pair with Cam Jordan. It was none of that. What they did was just like try to duct tape like a massive hole through the drywall, and it's just that's not how you need to think about building a team. And while the Saints are favored to win the division, I think the market just likes the addition of Carr, thinks he's a massive upgrade to Andy Dalton, and expects their offensive line to bounce back. But I just it's hard for me to think that the defense is going to continue being productive under Dennis Allen when you think about all the pieces they've lost from that and how much older everybody's gotten. So we'll see. They are the division favorites. Outside of winning a game in the playoffs, this team isn't deep enough to go toe to toe with Philly or Dallas right now. So to think this team could make one last stand just isn't a reality in the NFC as is now. So it's win the division and then bust. Like that's really it.
I don't think this team could go toe to toe with any of the past NFC playoff hopefuls that we talked about. So Philly, Dallas, Seattle, San Francisco, Detroit. I think all of those teams would run this team off the field, to be quite honest. And something to think about. We're talking about how they didn't really bring in all stars on that D line or anything. They traded away their pick, right, for Trevor Penning. That
Yep.
ended up being their pick this year, or maybe it was Olave. I don't remember which pick
It was
exactly it was.
what turned into in essence Jalen Carr.
Yeah, Jalen Carter, a guy that would have been an all-star on their D line, but it's just something to think about when they were again 2 years ago trying to tread water and win the division. Ended up not. I think they came in third behind us and the Bucks, but it's yeah, they're just trying to do everything they can to avoid a rebuild, but at what cost? Like, to do their ownership group and front office think that winning the division is a successful season for them? Is that like worth all the dead money, losing all these players, not bringing in a ton of premium talent like they did 2017? So yeah, 6, 7 years ago. I would say no. I think they got really lucky with that 2017 year and haven't really followed up with it. And I think they're they're being punished for it. We saw Tehran Armstead leave a couple years ago. Their whole D line basically had to leave this year. It's going to be interesting to see going forward who they're going to lose to the salary cap and just how they're going to try to rebuild from this. I think even if they get lucky in a really bad NFC South this year, they're not going anywhere in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the epitome of kind of what the NFC South overall feels like. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers echo that really, really well as they are deep within a rebuild. They are the last team in the division we play. The first time we play them is in week 13, so at the very top of December. What should we expect from this group?
Uh, it's the word that they're not gonna say, but we know they're doing it. It's a tank, all right. Like you said, we're seeing him week 13, but we're also gonna see him the last game of the year in the regular season. We're gonna actually be hosting them, so we're gonna get a good look at the depths of their roster as they're probably gonna be trying to lose that game. But yeah, like we know what's happening here.
It's rough, especially when a couple of years ago you were hosting the Lombardi Trophy. But this past year, they lose Tom Brady, Donovan Smith, Shaq Mason, Leonard Fournette, Keanu O'Neal, Akeem Hicks, Cameron Brate, and Scott Miller, all of whom played over 20% of the snaps last year. This offensive line is going to struggle to protect Baker Mayfield, who has one of the worst pressure to sack rates already. And then the only premium talent you have on offense is Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who aren't getting any younger. So at the end of the day, if you thought the offense was unwatchable at times last year under Tom Brady and Byron Leftwich, just wait for the Baker Mayfield and Dave Canales pairing this fall because it's going to be immaculate.
I kind of feel bad for Mike Evans, to be honest. He goes from the GOAT QB to now Baker. And as a whole, that receiver room looks pretty similar to how it was last season. In my opinion, Mike Evans is a Hall of Famer. 1,000 yards in every season he's ever played in. Just really good all-around receiver. Chris Godwin is pretty good when he's healthy, but both of those guys aren't getting any younger, and they've both dealt with at least some injury concern the past few years. Godwin more than Evans, that is. I would say at least they're moving on from Leonard Fournette and giving Rashad White some run. But outside of him and Trey Palmer, who was a sixth round pick, and he was my wide receiver 6 in the draft. I was super high on him. He's looked really good in the preseason. So really rooting for him to make the squad and put up numbers this year. But outside of Palmer and Rashad White, I don't think there's a lot to look forward to in the future regarding the offense on the team currently. I think you can look forward to the prospective QBs that they could be getting this year, but
I
currently
mean,
just
you still
Rashad
have
White and Palmer.
Tristan Wirfs. You have Tristan
Right.
Wirfs, but we'll touch on him here in a bit. I like the continuity with the group that you're talking about with the wide receivers. You have Evans, who, like you said, he's probably Hall of Fame bound, especially with how his career started. Godwin's great in the slot. And you have a couple of those young guys. You do have a couple skill weapons. I think this team's going to be a complete dumpster fire about halfway through the year. So we might actually see Evans get traded to a contender that needs somebody that can kind of push the perimeter. So we'll see if that plays out. But currently, Tristan Wirfs, who I was praising a little bit ago, slides left tackle this year. I think that was a mistake. I think if it's not broke, don't fix it. And he was an all pro at right tackle. We kind of Panther fans, you guys remember this. We had Taylor Moton at right tackle a couple years ago during the Matt Rule era. Kicked Moton over to left tackle and Brady Christensen to right tackle for a game. Jacob was telling me about this game the other day, actually. And it's kind of that knucklehead, scratch your head kind of situation. And you sometimes can't galaxy brain these things. If a player is good at playing a certain position, don't mess with that. Like it's not worth it doing this kind of whole reshuffling because you have Matt Filer, who is awful for the Chargers last year at left guard. Ryan Jensen is on IR again. So Robert Hansey, who filled in for him last year, is now the starting center. Rookie
And
Cody Mock at
Jen
it.
and Jensen, he might be done because they put him on season-ending IR a couple of days ago. He might be done for for his football career as well.
Yeah, no, the concern with his knee, which is still lingering from last year, is pretty much that this is career ending. So why he is going on IR, why he was signed to a 3-year deal, it really is at this point that he's done. It
Hmm.
canned. There is no coming back this year, probably ever. And so then you have a rookie at right guard, and Cody Mock comes out of North Dakota State, second round pick. Luke Gadecki, your second round pick last year, he's your right tackle, and he looked awful last year. So when you have that much youth and inexperience on the offensive line, and you really only have one dude, like Baker's pocket presence isn't going to help. So it's just this is stuff that gets compounded really, really quickly, and you just wonder if it's going to be a lot of 3 and outs.
Yeah, and the big thing, like you're talking about with Wirfs moving from right to left tackle, he even mentioned that he needed psychological encouragement with that because he was afraid he would let his team down and didn't know how the transition would work out. Like you're saying, he's one of the best right tackles in the game, maybe the best right tackle. I don't know why you think you need him.
Lane
Well,
Johnson,
yeah,
don't.
Lane Johnson, but hey, Lane Johnson's getting up there, and
He
Wirfs
is.
is
He is.
like a still relatively young player. I think he's still on his rookie deal. So best young right tackle in the game. I think it's asinine that you would try to move him over to the left. It's just that doesn't help him. I don't think it's going to help the O line, and it's just this team isn't winning anything this year anyway. So it seems like a pretty bad situation, and I'm pretty down on the Bucks offense as a whole. But I do think that defense should still be good. Unlike the Saints and the Falcons, I am not concerned about that defensive line. It's still stout. They still have guys like Shaq Barrett and Vita Vea, and they've spent early draft picks the last 3 years adding to it. You think the year after they won the Super Bowl, they draft Joe Tryon, edge rusher. Then 2 years ago, they traded back and got Logan Hall as their first pick. And then this past year, they added Kalijah Cansey with I think it was the 19th pick in the
Yep.
first round. And so they've added some good talent to that D line the past few years. They just need to start producing.
And the defense has been solid under Todd Bowles. Even last year, while he was a head coach, like that's what carried this team to the division title
Hmm.
because Tom Brady, that like what we were talking about earlier, if you thought it was unwatchable watching Brady and Leftwich operate that offense with the offensive line injuries, like they got zero production outside of like 2-minute drills and other stuff that kind of pushed the field down in these last second drives. And so when you think about that, Anton Winfield comes back, Carlton Davis comes back, Jamal Dean comes back in the secondary. That group should still be good. But now you're asking them to hold up even more since Baker is a downgrade. You have a lot of offensive line departures. And so, like, can the defense stay healthy? And can, like you said, Kalijah Cansey, Logan Hall, Vita Vey, some of these guys step up and just dominate? Because that's the only way this team is going to win games throughout the year.
I do think, I was lower on Kansu than a lot of people. I do think that this was the perfect spot for him, going next to Vita Vea, who might be the biggest, like really good defensive tackle in the league in terms of like just size. He's the perfect guy to put beside Kalijah Cansey. And yeah, that defense should still be pretty good. But I think the main point on the Bucks is that they just don't have enough juice to compete in this division. And I think they know it. I think they're tanking. It's pretty clear there. They still have some good like players at premium positions, but it's a tank. Bringing in Baker instead of Jacoby Brissett pretty much confirms this in my mind. Baker was one of, if not the worst starters last year. I'm not trying to hate on him as a Panthers fan or anything, but he just wasn't good last year. And Jacoby Brissett was a guy that was pretty good last year. He was the best quarterback that played in Cleveland last year. I think he was another top 10 EPA guy during his time as a starter. So
Yeah.
if they wanted to compete, that was the guy to bring in. But they brought in Baker instead, and I think we all know what that means.
Yeah, I think Jacoby, had they tried to make a push for him, would have operated a little bit better in structure. I think that that's the issue with Baker, is that if he had a solid offensive line, we saw spurts in Cleveland where he did well. But the issue is again, he senses pressure. He gets out of the pocket. He's not good on the run. He thinks he's some 4-4 athlete, and he isn't. And when you put all this together, like, I think this is a bottom three team in the NFC. I'd put them with the Rams and the Cardinals that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And really, my only question about this team, because I think it's a dumpster fire, is this enough to get Mayor Williams? Will the defense not be able to hold up enough to where they have a top 3, top 5 pick? And who knows? They're definitely going to have a good shot at selecting one come April. I wonder how quickly Bowles is out the door. I think it's easy to say he's one of the first head coaches fired this year.
This is going to be the Bo Nix team. I'm calling it now. But all right, we've done 31 other team breakdowns, kind of who they've added, who they've lost, our perspective on them. It's time. We saved the best for last. It's time to go over the Cats and looking at just a quick peek at our schedule. I'm thinking 17-0. What do you think?
I think we need to come down. I can definitely see 10 as a ceiling, to be realistic. And we'll get more into that. But there is a lot to love with this team. Frank Reich as the new head coach, it's cool kind of peeling back the layers on where he came from, because a lot of people remember him as being the OC for Doug Peterson in Philadelphia. Well, where was he before that? Well, he was an offensive assistant for Tony Dungy, for Jim Caldwell in Indianapolis. And if you check back at like Tony Dungy's background, he came from Marty Schottenheimer, Chuck Noll, some of those, like, I wouldn't say aerial or West Coast offenses, but it's a little bit more nuanced. And then he paired with the Andy Reid mine in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson. And that's kind of the modern way of building offensive coaching staffs. You take these guys from different trees and you put them together, and the offensive blend comes to be really, really special. So, for instance, Wright goes to Indianapolis when he was first hired from Philadelphia. He hired Sirianni, who comes from a Belichick Parcells background. And then now with Carolina, he hires Thomas Brown from the McVay tree. And the fact that McCown and Reich were both quarterbacks, I think Bryce Young gets to learn a lot from them, even though he doesn't have the best weapons around him. So when you have coaches that understand your position and are trying to do the best for you, I think that's great, even though we're trying to build the wide receiver room.
Absolutely. That the coaching staff as a whole, and particularly on offense, it's got to be one of the best in the league. I personally think our coaching staff's the best in the league, but that could be biased. But then
I
it's
think
coming to
we're I
Bryce
think we're
Young,
a top 5, top to bottom. If
top
you
five.
look at all positions and then who we have at the top, I think it's top 5.
Fair enough. Top five. But then we get to the new quarterback, and what more is there to say about Bryce Young? He's been the talk of the town on like NFL Network and everything since he's been drafted number one overall. He was the best QB in college football the past 2 seasons. Extremely good feel for the game, great pocket mover to move and find throwing lanes, excellent accuracy, and he has a pretty good arm. It's not the strongest arm, like it's not Levis or Richardson, but it's an NFL QB arm. It's like Burrow, and he just seems like an NFL QB already. Just looking at his preseason, he seems poised. He's not rattled by the pressure or the hits he's taken. He's getting the ball to accurate spots, or he's throwing it away, so there's not any picks. The preseason plays really reflected what he did at Alabama, and I can't wait to see what he does this season. Hopefully, we do get him some more weapons as his career continues, but for this year, at least it's serviceable. They're not good, but they're serviceable.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on why he looks so poised. A lot of people remember Alabama quarterbacks like Mac Jones and Jalen Hurts, who are starting NFL quarterbacks at the NFL, and they remember him kind of darting up teams in that Alabama offense. But as you've pointed out with Bryce Young, he played behind a porous Alabama offensive line last year. He was pressured, he had to move around, and like you said, found windows, and he demonstrated all of that this past preseason, even with all the concerns of Ike Ekwonu. And that is what is so impressive about a rookie. Like, again, we are talking about a rookie quarterback, and he is demonstrating some veteran qualities. So, with that being said, we are leaning on a committee approach at wide receiver. We try to hodgepodge it. We have Thielen, who's looked good out of the slot. He's looked good all off season. We have Hurst, who will be a good security blanket for Bryce. And we've seen that already in a couple critical situations in the preseason on a couple third downs. And then the explosion, the juice of the offense is really, I think, going to come through two players on the perimeter. It's going to be DJ Chark, who's really going to stretch the field, and you're going to have Mingo underneath. And if you can get the ball to him in space, you got to let those guys eat and do what they do best. And like outside of that, it isn't the worst position group, but it's definitely one of the bottom ones in the league. And so the O line is what's got to kind of pick up where it left off last year and really be the bedrock for this team.
Yeah, I know a big topic for concern among Panthers fans this preseason kind of stretch is that the O line is it's taken a huge step back and everything, but I'm not that concerned. Chandler Zavala, the rookie we drafted out of NC State, he looks like to be a decent starter at that right guard spot. And once Corbett is back, I think the O line is only going to get better. I think his absence is showing us that he's pretty clearly our best O lineman, or maybe second best besides Taylor Moton.
Moton,
So
yeah, I
get
was
it.
about to say.
Yeah. Yeah, he's starting the year on the pup list, which means first 4 games he can't come back. But hopefully he's back pretty soon after that, maybe after the bye, after the first 6 games. I think the O line's only going to get better going into year two with James Campen as the head coach. And another thing I really wanted to point out in regards to our offense is the emergence of offensive coordinator Thomas Brown as the eventual play caller of our offense. Reich has said in quite a few press conferences that that's his long-term goal is to get Brown to be our play caller. And just going through the preseason, our play calls and play designs certainly looked better with Brown at the helm. He brings that kind of the McVay, what's the word? McVay seasoning, I guess, into the offense coming from LA. And I think that's really going to be more dynamic than the Frank Reich offense. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if or when he takes over this season. I think it might be after the bye week in week 7. Could be later than that, could be earlier than that. Who knows? But I'm looking forward to seeing what Thomas Brown can do as a first time play caller this year. I think that's really going to bump his stock because he was pretty highly regarded throughout the league as a prospective head coach. I think he even had a couple of head coach interviews this past cycle.
Absolutely. And we're expected to have 3 or 4 tight ends. Frank Reich is known to run 12 personnel at a higher rate. But what we saw in the preseason was exactly like what you were alluding to, almost the McVay seasoning. We ran 11 personnel 93% of our preseason snaps. Like you said, Thomas Brown, when he started calling plays in the second halves, you saw a lot more motion, a lot more creativity, which comes from that McVay tree. So having a guy like that in the room who can take over the play calling and add a little bit of juice, like you said, after the bye week could be huge down the stretch when we're playing teams for pivotal playoff seedings and division title stakes. So I think that's huge. The biggest thing is how this offense can be better than last year's. And I think how we finished the year last year is a good way to start it. Where you said we've had some O-line concerns. When Corbett gets back, there's a lot of those are going to get shored up. But 4 out of the 6 first matchups to start the year, we play teams like the Falcons, Saints, Vikings, Lions, all of whom, when we've talked about them, have question marks on the defense and the defensive line. Let this offensive line get settled in by just pounding the rock. Like, I don't think you understand how much offensive linemen love to push around guys just as much as defensive linemen do. So when they get to be able to kind of go on the offense, set the edge, that kind of sets the tone for the season and the game, and it'll put a lot less on Bryce's shoulders to be the man drive in and drive out.
Oh yeah, look at that Seahawks game last year. I think the first drive we had 19 runs, and we scored a touchdown on that drive.
They
Just
couldn't
set the
do
tone
anything
for the
about it.
entire
We
game.
just,
That was the Arby's package game, I think. And
yeah.
like you're saying, we aren't facing the most daunting D lines early to start the year. I think it's a good point to kind of get our offensive line settled in, run the ball, let Bryce adjust to the speed of the game a bit. Even though I personally don't think he needs to adjust. I think he's already there. But yeah, just let the offensive line get settled in.
Yeah,
Also, and that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to second when you said I don't think Bryce needs the adjustment. I just don't want as much on his shoulders. Like
Oh
let's
yeah,
not
for sure.
just give him the entire keys to the castle and just say you got to run this. Like let's give him some easy buttons, and I think we can do that.
Yeah, don't Joe Burrow him and just make him do everything his rookie year. Uh, like interestingly enough, we aren't facing the best D lines like you're saying. We also aren't facing the most difficult stretch of defenses before the bye for Bryce. So hopefully he can take advantage of that as a whole, like defenses as a whole. And yeah, hopefully he can take advantage of that.
Now, I do want to clarify because anybody that listens knows that I'm involved in kind of the NFL analytics community. I don't want to say by running the ball that at a higher rate we're going to win more. Studies don't back that up empirically, but when you have the pieces on the offensive line that we do, Ike Ekwonu is more suited in the run game. When we can get some of these guys like Bozeman and Zavala and Moten up to the next level on a couple different packages and run packages we'll see from Thomas Brown, which that was his speciality in LA. I think that's what's going to set the tone early on. The matchups later in the year, it's like when you play defensive lines like the Dolphins, the Cowboys, or the Bucks, even the Packers have. That's when we're going to lean on Bryce playmaking ability. We're going to need to the lean on the quick passing game and just kind of march methodically down the field.
Yeah, I think running the ball also helps the O line get set in their pass sets too, because it gives them rhythm. But yeah, like you're saying, those first few games should be easier on the team as a whole, and then Bryce will have to step up towards the end. And like the offense, our defense as a whole rather has gotten some pretty big additions to the coaching staff and the players. I think we all know Ajiro Evero will be a head coach pretty soon. He got a head coach interview here, couple other spots. He got a couple of DC interview spots. He's going to boost this unit from a scheme perspective by a big margin.
I think he's like one of he may be the only one in the top 10 that I have ranked as a play caller to not have a head coaching job, which is pretty
Yeah.
spectacular on the defensive side of the ball. I know everybody's kind of switched to the offensive side. You need somebody that kind of play call with your quarterback one, your franchise quarterback, but he is a really fundamental piece. And I mean, you already know my thoughts on the defensive line. With us retaining Reddick, letting Dante walk, but with us having Burns and being able to add Justin Houston and Shy Tuttle and doing some other things to our defensive line, like drafting a DJ Johnson and letting Amari Barno and Kobe Jones, even though he's cut, kind of develop over this training camp, like gave me a lot of hope about this group. And I thought we could have built it a different way in previous off seasons, but I really like how it's shaped up, paired with the fact that we have Von Bell and Deshaun Williams. We have some good rotation along with stars with Luvu, JC, and Shin that'll definitely give Evero stuff to work with because when you run a Fangio style system, you need a good 3 tech to kind of get after. I don't know if Derek Brown will be that or Shy Tuttle will be that in this defense. Then you need a lockdown corner, which you have in JC Horn. So there's a lot to love with what Evero has to work with. And I think he's going to have a similar unit in terms of production like what we saw in Denver. And if you have a top 10 defense, all Bryce has to do is keep this offense around average, and we're going to win a lot of games.
Yeah, you'll see with Evero, you're going to start seeing people like Luvu play the three tech on some plays. He makes some funky fronts, which work out pretty well. I think that defensive line is definitely stout, but the linebacker room actually might be the strongest unit on defense. Granted, I wrote this part before this morning when Deion Jones and Brandon Smith got cut, but I still feel this way. The linebacker room is still really good. Shaq took a reduced deal. I think he spread his cap hit over this year and next year to stay with the squad. He's kind of our consummate leader on defense. I think he's the oldest guy on the team other than JJ in terms of
And both are
tenure.
the last two that are still rostered from the 2015 squad. So yes,
From that
there's
Super
a
Bowl.
yep.
Mm.
So they,
So
they they got a little bit of that championship juice in them.
right. He knows what it takes to get there, which is always good. You need your vet leaders on defense. We added Camus Gruger Hill to be a special teams ace. That's what I thought he was going to be, but he's made a lot of plays in training camp. I believe he had 4 interceptions during camp, some Andy Dalton, some Bryce Young. I think he picked off Zach Wilson in the joint practices with the Jets.
And
Uh,
that's how you get above a guy like Deion Jones and Brandon Smith. Like that's exactly like you said. Like even though we cut those guys, like you feel so confident about this group because of that.
Right. And then we have Frankie Louvu, who's I think our best linebacker pretty clearly. I think he's the guy that we both think can be a Pro Bowler this season. Like if you stack his raw stats up against the All Pro players last year, he has like similar, like the same or better stats than a lot of them. He's just on the Panthers.
So this
Louvu,
isn't a perfect take, but I think Luvu can make a push for an All Pro vote. Like if this is a top
ooh,
10 unit and we're kind of on the scene, I don't know if Horn has enough to get that, but I think Luvu front and center. Like you never know.
yeah, I know he's a big part of like NFL Twitter, sicko Twitter. He's one of their favorite players. So hopefully he gets some more love this year. He deserves it, and he's going to get paid this year by us or by somebody else. Hopefully it's us. And
We
this
can write
does
the check. We need to write the check.
absolutely, yeah. Him and Burns need to extend him now, but this doesn't even include guys like Brandon Smith who got cut, Bumper Pool who's a UDFA who got cut. Those are guys that can be on the practice squad. I believe Chandler Wooten's going to be our fourth linebacker. He's a really good special teams guy too. This, in my opinion, is the best linebacker room that the Panthers have had since maybe 2015, maybe 2013, but I think 2015 is where I would put it.
I think
Just go-
that's going back a little bit too far because 2018 we still had Keekly, Davis, like we talked about. Shaq Thompson's been with the team since 2015, and then we also had another guy that I thought was sneaky good and would make the roster now. Back how he played was Jermaine Carter. I
I did not
loved.
think he was good. I was not
Okay,
a fan of
I thought he was a
him.
special teams, a really good on special teams. I thought he was a guy that could fill in, but yeah, I'd argue
Yeah.
2018. But yeah, exactly
Well,
like you said,
y-
it's years back.
and TD was on the back end of his career, and I believe 2018 was Luke's last concussion as well. So a lot
Yeah,
of like in and outs in that linebacker room. But yeah, that was still a pretty good room.
the like we talked about with the offensive line with some of the concerns, and I think what the concerns are is that there's not a lot of depth. Another position group we don't have a lot of depth of, but I do like the starters is the secondary. We brought in Von Bell and Troy Hill this offseason, and Dante Jackson is back from injury. It's definitely a deeper secondary than we've had in a long time, and we can run a lot of big nickel because of Jeremy and Shin and Von Bell, but it's just if we have another devastating injury to a guy like JC Horn, I like our safety depth, but I'm just not confident in this cornerback room, and that's a lot of the hesitation that you're hearing from me. Is that as much as I want to believe in this group, and it is good when it's healthy, we get an injury or two, we're going to have holes in this defense, and that's where it goes. Okay, can Evero hide these holes, or are they going to be too much to where offenses then all be able to kind of pick us apart?
We did cut a lot of our corner depth on the team today, so I do think they're going to be moving or pushing to make a move for more corner depth, be it from picking up people who are cut or maybe trading for a guy like maybe a Bradley Roby, something like that. But I agree with you there with the corner room being our weak link on the defensive end. But I think the additions to the spots we needed, like Von Bell, Shy Tuttle, plus Evero being just able to scheme these guys better than his predecessors, I think that they can vault our defense into the top 10 unit that we all know that they can achieve. I would expect them to hover like maybe between 8th and 14th, 15th throughout the year. but top 10 is what I think should be the ceiling for this team. And with Evero being able to scheme it, I think they can achieve it.
So like here's the thing. The Patriots, I would argue on paper, have like a better defense, but their strength of
Right.
schedule, they play against Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, some of those guys twice a year. And it's like the best quarterbacks we have on our schedule are Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott. And so the large amount of guys that we're playing are mediocre or rookie quarterbacks, and that could lend itself to this defense balling out even more than what we're seeing it projected as. And so I think the big issue last year was our offense could never stay on the field with Baker or Walker. And so Bryce Young, he sustains a few more drives, keeps our defense kind of rested, and is able to put some points on the board. I really think this defense can get after and put the pedal to the metal. I mean, Luvu had like 2 pick sixes, like Saints, Cardinals. This is a defense that can start getting a little bit more aggressive if we can play with a lead, and I think Bryce can sometimes offer that in the first halves of game, and that could completely change how we view this defense.
Absolutely. I think with that and with the offense in mind, I think the team has a tremendous, like really tremendous improvement across the board from both the players and the coaching staff. I think almost every position group, I think the two that we could argue are maybe wide receiver and corner. Other than that, I think every position group is improved, and obviously the coaching staff is tremendously improved from the start of last year. Steve Wilkes is a great head coach, so I'm not sure that that's a huge improvement there, but he was a great head coach. I want to point that out. Needs a fair shot. Uh, but yeah,
He does.
we had to deal with Rule to start the year. A lot of coaching staff and turnover in the middle of the season. Remember, there were after Wilkes took over, a lot of position coaches were let go because
Yep.
I think they followed Rule to Nebraska. Um, or I don't even remember if he had the Nebraska job at the time, but a lot of position coaches were let go. I think it's reasonable to expect this team to be better and just have a better record. I mean, we were 7-10 with all the turmoil going on last year. The only hesitation that I would have with this is that typically teams with rookie QBs don't have a ton of year one success.
But why
That being
is
said,
that? Why is
because they're on
that?
bad teams, we're not a super great
Mm.
team,
But we
but
were
we are
seven
in
and
the NFC
ten.
South.
Yeah.
Right, we were 7-10, and that's why I think that 8 to 9 wins should be realistic. Maybe the expectation. I would say maybe 7 wins could be our floor and 10 is the ceiling. And I want to get into our schedule a bit here. Similarly to last week, we talked about the Jags, or I talked about the Jags, maybe sneaking into that 1 seed in the AFC because they play the AFC South and the NFC South. Well, guess what? We play the AFC South and the NFC South too. So that's 10 games, obviously, or rather
Yep. 10
8
games,
games,
six plus
or
four.
10, yeah, 10 games. I was messing up. Obviously, the Jags are a lot better than we are, but outside of that, that's 9 games where, hey, we could have a shot here, and then all the other games added into that. So maybe 7 wins is the floor, maybe 10 to 11 as the ceiling. I think we should expect improvement. I just wouldn't be too hasty to crown us as, oh, we're gonna go 13-4 now that we have a QB. I think it might take a year or two to build the rest of the team around Bryce.
It's definitely going to take a year or two to fully build it. But a lot of times you see these quarterbacks on rookie contracts, their teams make a Super Bowl push in the second or third year, and that's the window I think we've opened up for ourselves. And I think the best, because everybody wants to point to rookie quarterbacks don't do well in terms of how the team performs from a winning standpoint. Well, most of the time, they actually improve their wins from the year before. And the best example of that is that the Washington Commanders, before the name change, they traded up. They grabbed Robert Griffin III, and they were 6-10 before drafting him. You know what they went after drafting him? 10-6. And so that's really all we're seeing is that hey, you plug in a good quarterback into a competent team, you get a wild card division title in terms of since we play in the NFC South, that kind of caliber team right out of the gate. And that's what I'm seeing. That's what I think everything that we've seen from the coaching staff down to training camp. Yes, preseason, we go 0-3. But like you said, Thomas Brown could take over play calling duties after the bye, and that's a bump in your team. Like so you can take this easier part in the schedule, get acclimated, and then start winning games and start taking a step as an offense.
And with the preseason, I would say our starting unit improved every game. I think
It
that's a
did.
big thing as well. Like they built the confidence after every game. But yeah,
With that, we are wrapped up with all 32 teams and the breakdown for the NFC South. We have the additions and subtractions. The first one up is the head coach hiring here in Charlotte.
that's right. I think a head coach should be number one, no matter what, or if there are multiple, maybe like one, two, three. But we
They can
brought
be
in Frank
tenured
Reich.
longer than a player. That's why. Like a lot of people need
Oh
to
yeah,
understand, we
absolutely.
have a lot of coaches on this ranking, and the reason is that they can be there for 4 or 5 years. Most
Right, and
players
go
here
ahead.
for
You
three,
got it.
4 years in the NFL. So it's more just the longevity of that and the value they add in terms of the roster.
Well, that and they also scheme up all the players as opposed to
Hmm.
just one player having set impact. So number one is obviously Frank Reich. He's the only new head coach to the division. He's been a head coach before and was successful in Indianapolis despite some extenuating circumstances with the QB decisions that the owner, the GM, and in part Frank Reich played. We can't
He had a
hold
new
him free
starting
of blame
quarterback every
every
single
year.
year.
Hmm.
Like that's a lot to go through. And I get you do put some of that blame on him, but that's why when he came to Carolina, Tepper had been doing the same thing, going through Teddy, Baker, Sam Darnold, all those guys, and went, that's it. We're getting our franchise guy. And that's what they did.
Absolutely. He was kind of thrust into a bad spot after the Luck retirement, but he made the most out of it. He had a I believe he went 40, 33, and 1 with the Colts. He had a positive record. And he's been in this league a long time. I mean, hell, he was our first QB, first touchdown pass ever for the Panthers. So he's been around the
In
block.
Atlanta,
And Atlanta, yeah, that's a good callback. And so he knows what it takes. He's been a successful coach. He won a Super Bowl with the Eagles when he was calling or when he was the offensive coordinator there. He's just a pro coach, and that's exactly what we needed. And he assembled one of the best coaching staffs that we've seen in the league, maybe ever. And like you were talking about, he went through the QB struggles in Indianapolis. So Tepper said, "All right, it's time to get our guy." And that guy is number two on our list. That's Bryce Young. Like I said, best QB in college football, incredible processor, already feels like he has NFL poise. The size thing, concern, whatever, it's always going to follow him just because he's an outlier there. But if he can play like he did at Alabama and play well and shut people up, he's going to be in the league a long time.
he is. I think he can have a Drew Brees arc in terms of longevity, in terms of playing
Hmm.
15 plus years in the NFL, simply because he gets the ball out of his hands quickly. As much as we want to look at guys like Anthony Richardson and Will Levis and be like, oh, they can take hits. Well, we watched Cam Newton and Andrew Luck, two guys that were 6'5", 240, 250 pounds, have their seasons, or not seasons, their careers come short because of injuries, because they thought they could Superman it. And Bryce Young is smart enough to realize, hey, I can't do that already at my frame. Let me be smart. And that's what he's displayed all throughout college, the preseason, training camp, and it's the reason why he's the week 1 starter. Now, another quarterback that we have on this list at number 3 is Derek Carr. And if the Saints are really going to kind of back up what the market is implying that they are the division favorites, it's going to be on this guy's shoulders. He is going to have to operate this offense at a very high level, which is, it's a little concerning because you have Pete Carmichael calling plays, but you're just hoping him and Olave and some of the other guys on this offense have a good connection. Now, number 4, a guy that we're going to have on defense for the Panthers, Ejiro Evero, or no, Ejiro Evero. There we go. Trying to rhyme his first name and his last name is not the move. But he's going to be scheming up defenses to stop a guy like Derek Carr. And I absolutely love what he has to work with here in Carolina. And I think he's going to take full advantage of it and have several head coaching interviews next offseason.
Yeah, another guy that's going to have several head coaching interviews in the future, to add on to the ones he's already had, is the Panthers' new offensive coordinator, Thomas Brown. Like we said, he hasn't called plays before. He was the run game coordinator. He's a running backs coach, tight ends coach. He was an offensive coordinator in college. He was a college running back at Georgia, one of the best Georgia backs ever. He's just been around the block a ton. He's coming from over from Sean McVay's staff, so he's going to bring some of that to this offense, and I'm really looking forward to what he can do once he's the full-time play caller. And then at number 6, another coach. Now, I promise this is the end of all the coaches. It's Ryan Nielsen, who's the new Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator. He's coming over from the Saints, and he's bringing a lot of his Saints guys with him. It's just going to be important because he has to fill Dean Pease's shoes, who's just not an all-time coach, but he's been around the league a long time, and he's going to have to really call a defense that invested a ton of money this past offseason on that defense. He's going to have to get them right this year if they want to be able to compete and win this division.
I mean, you spend over $65 million in free agency. You hope you brought in the right guys, and that's really the big question here. The other concern is, and we talked about it earlier. You guys, as Panther fans who are listening, you know this. Eric Washington, he was the kind of the last guy. Sean McDermott leaves. Our secondary coach at the time, Steve Wilkes, he stepped in as defensive coordinator, got a job quickly after. Eric Washington steps in, and it wasn't the same. And there can sometimes be a lack of vision when you're so entrenched in the trenches, pun intended, and that's what could be lost here. But at the same time, if he can get the most out of Atlanta's porous defensive line, I think that's a great start too, especially for that defense trying to make a rebound. At number 7, we have Adam Thielen. We paid him a lot of money from Minnesota. I would have preferred paying a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, but he wasn't available at the start of free agency. And he's been a great veteran presence who's been able to teach some of these younger guys in the room, which is great, while being a great security blanket for Bryce Young.
And
Number 8,
caught Bryce's first touchdown.
in preseason, we'll see
Mm-hmm.
the actual first real touchdown, who that goes to. At number 8, we have a guy who's going to be electric, regardless of what you think about the surplus or team building point and drafting him. This guy is going to tear it up, and that's Bijan Robinson. This guy is going to run wild. I would expect 1,200 yards if Tyler Algier and Cordell Patterson could be as effective as they could be in this system. And he is going to run over a lot of people, and it's going to be fun to watch. I like as a rival, I'm not thrilled to see him touching the ball. I will say that. I would rather see Ritter stepping back to throw that ball than Bijan running it.
Absolutely. He's going to run over, around, and through you. He's probably going to have like 2 touchdowns against us week 1, even though we'll
Yep.
probably win. We're going to win that one. But you heard it here. But another guy who's electric that was drafted to this division in the first round is Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle that's now on the Bucks, or could be defensive end. He is smaller than every other defensive lineman. He's up there with Aaron
Aaron
Donald in
Donald,
terms of, yeah, same college, right? He's up there in terms of
Pittsburgh.
measurables. But here's the thing. He's also extremely fast, extremely strong, extremely quick. His raw score was like 9.9 something, and the only reason it wasn't a 10 is because his arms are short. He's an incredible athlete, and he's going to be able to tear it up beside Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, and some of those other first-round picks that the Bucks have invested on that defensive line. Hopefully, he tears it up against everybody but us this year. And then the last member of our top 10 additions to the division is another defensive lineman. And this one's one we're going to have to face week 1 in Calais Campbell. Now, he is the oldest player on our list. I think he's older than Carr. Yeah. Oldest player on our list of top 10 additions. He's 36 years old, like we talked about. He's getting up there in age, but he was still productive for the Ravens last year. Had 5 or more sacks, and he's coming to not inexperienced, but a line on the Falcons that hasn't been put together. Still has a lot of questions. An older O line. They're going to need him to produce for that O line because, like you said, they don't have a ton of young depth, and it's just the way it is. It's just old. I don't. It's just old. I don't have anything else there.
Yeah, you're hoping Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata can do well enough on the interior that it's Breeze, Bud Dupree, Zach Harrison, and Calais Campbell off the edge. We'll see if that plays out the way I think they're trying to draw it up, but it's a little skeptical. We will talk about the losses now. The top 10 subtractions from the NFC South. At number 1, it is the first ballot Hall of Famer, the greatest of all time, no matter what you want to say. It's Tom Brady. And when you lose a guy of his caliber, what he brings to the locker room, what he brings to practice, what he brings snap in and snap out in terms of getting guys ready, you lose so much. And there's a lot of losses on this offensive line between Donovan Smith and Shaq Mason and not getting Ryan Jensen back. And you have Baker Mayfield now. And I personally, I want to see the Bucks fans who buy a Baker Mayfield jersey, because this is going to be catastrophic. What happens in Tampa this year, it's going to be bad. A guy at number 2 that we have to talk about, though, outside of Tom Brady, and there's a huge drop off from number one to number two. But it's DJ Moore in Carolina. We had to send someone in order to move the Bears from one, and we decided on DJ Moore, which I thought was smarter over Brian Burns and Derek Brown. But that means we have one less weapon on the perimeter, a guy that had three consecutive 1,000-yard seasons during his rookie contract. This guy's electric. He's a playmaker in space, and he's going to be missed.
Absolutely. He's one of the best after the catch receivers in terms of breaking tackles and going the distance. When he came out of the draft, I thought he was like souped up Golden Tate, and I think he's lived up to that. I don't think that's an insult at all. He's just been
No,
really
not at
good,
all.
and he's dealt with a lot of QB turmoil. So hopefully Justin Fields is able to put it together this year, and he's able to finally have good QB play in his career. Number three is another Panthers loss. It's Steve Wilks, a guy that really righted the ship last year after the start of the season and Matt Rule was let go. Wilks really stepped in and provided the leadership that our team needed. He rallied the guys to winning. I believe Wilks was 6-6 during his tenure. If
He
you
was.
extrapolate that over a full year, it's been since 2017 that we've gone 500 or above. So something like that is not something to be trifled about, to like frown upon. Wilkes did a really good job here, and hopefully he's able to do a really good job in San Francisco as their defensive coordinator this season.
What was
Number
funny is
four,
Matt Rule was supposed to be like this was his make or break it year, and he came out of the gate slow as all get out, and then Wilkes was able to, like you said, like nothing to be frowned upon in terms of performance. He got out of the roster what you were expecting, and
oh,
that's what you
no, no,
want
no.
in a coach.
He got more out of the roster than what we were
True.
expecting. I think is a fair way to put it. I mean, we were
I
1-4 at that point and 6-6. Even with the that first game was kind of rough versus the Rams, but that wasn't really his squad. They let go of Robbie Anderson, traded McCaffrey, but after that they got it rolling, and we were 6-5 after that, and he led us to second in the division, almost to a division title versus the Bucks last year, but it kind of all
C.J.
fell flat. That
Henderson
yeah.
and Sam Darnold.
But yeah, at number four is a defensive lineman staying in the division, but going from the Saints to the Falcons. It's David Onyemata. They paid him a pretty penny. He's coming over with Ryan Nielsen, and he's going to have to help contribute on that, again, just old defensive line. And I think this is a big loss for the Saints because, like we talked about, they're just bringing in backups and rotation players to fill his void and a few other people's voids we'll talk about later on this list.
A guy that was drafted in 2015, I believe he's missed like 3 or 4 games over that duration. Been a solid left tackle. Was Donovan Smith for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he had somewhat of a forgettable season to even his standards last year, and because of that, the Buccaneers didn't re-sign him. I believe he was a free agent. They might have cut him, but I don't think it would have made sense to cut him. He goes to Kansas City, and he'll be the new left tackle for Patrick Mahomes. So hopefully he gets a restart there, reboot, and kind of picks up where he was during Tom Brady's prime. At number 6, we have, like we were talking about, Saints lose a lot of guys. We pick up Shy Tuttle, the Saints lose Shy Tuttle. And everything that I saw, especially when we went down the training camp that one day, he's been pushing Derek Brown. And when you have guys in the same position group that are able to push somebody next to him, that's getting another 1%, that rolls into the season. And so we could see good years from both of those guys if they're on the field.
Absolutely. I love the Tuttle edition. Another Bucks O lineman that's not going to be with the team this year, oh, excuse me, is Ryan Jensen. He's their center. Like we talked about, he got put on season-ending IR a couple of days ago. He's going to miss the season. I think his career going forward may be in doubt, but he was a really good pro that the Bucks have had for quite a while. And just losing your center outside of maybe your left tackle or even right tackle in today's NFL, losing your center is huge. This is the guy that a lot of times can call the defense, point out the mic or whoever's blitzing, and losing that kind of guy is huge, especially for a guy with poor pocket presence like Baker.
Yep.
And then another Saints D lineman that is leaving the division, and
Our
this
third
time
one.
they're getting out of the division this time, not just moving teams. It's Marcus Davenport. He didn't really live up to the hype of his draft selection. He was kind of marred by injuries, but the fact that he's just the third Saints starting D lineman that's leaving, we couldn't leave him off the list. I mean, he's just too important. Now they're starting a rotation guy in Carl Granderson there. Hopefully he can play up to Davenport's level or past it, but that Saints D line is not looking great.
No, it's not. I mean, you lose three. These three guys that we talked about all played 40% or more of the snaps on defense last year for the Saints. Like these aren't just like, oh, this guy was out already with injury and his contract expired. It's like, no, you got actual snaps from these guys and your defensive line was not good and now they're gone. At number 9, we have Shaq Mason. He got traded to the Houston Texans. They seem to be trading for every offensive lineman they can this offseason. I think, like you said, they'll probably have 13 offensive linemen on the final 53. It's insane. At number 10, we have Leonard Fournette. He's still a free agent. I thought he would have been a good signing for the Patriots up until they grabbed Ezekiel Elliott. Just seemed like that bruiser back that you bring in for a 1 or 2 yard punch. Maybe the Panthers bring him in because we really don't have that guy since we cut who did we Spencer
Spencer
no,
Brown.
it
Spencer
was
Brown.
Spencer Brown. I was
Yeah.
about to say Spencer
Mhm.
Ware and I was like, nope, that is a old Chiefs running back that's probably
Old
not in the
Chiefs
league
back.
anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. So and it's somebody like that where I feel like he can still find his role with a contending team if they need that. And
Absolutely
so
proven pro. I would even take him here because we don't have that true bruiser on our roster currently.
absolutely. And he could be a guy that we sign halfway through the year and go, "Hey, we need this. This is something when we're on 4th and 1 or we're on the goal line, we can't get it in." And that's where you bring in a guy like that.
Absolutely, and it's that time. You know, this is our eighth time doing this, probably our last time doing it. That we're doing.
No, we'll do
Well,
perfect takes throughout the
well, during the
season.
season, yeah. I mean, before the season, our last time doing it. It's time for our takes, and we usually go alphabetical because J is before S. But why don't you start this one, Steve?
Oh, you're so sweet, Jacob. So I have 2 takes today. I think usually I'm around 3, but today it's 2. This first one's a double-sided one. It's that Carolina wins the division, and the reason why we win the division is Bryce Young is the offensive rookie of the year. I think there really is no comparison in this draft class, or I, I mean, maybe you could go back to Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, like guys that are so good in terms of just seeing the field. That can process what's going on and make the right decision and make it quickly. And Bryce Young does that even though he's undersized. He's one of those guys that's just playing smart football down in and down out. My second take is that the Buccaneers will land a top 5 pick and Bowles will be the first coach fired this year.
Hmm. I think that's definitely plausible. I think I said early in our series that Stefanski would be the first one. I could see either of those guys being the first coach fired, but I do think that if expectations aren't met, Stefanski isn't surviving the year, and I certainly think that if the Bucks get the top 5 pick that they want, then they will bring in a new coach for their new rookie QB. My first take is that nobody in this division is going to win more than 9 games, so no double-digit winners. It's going to be
A
like
lot of
last
hurt
year.
Panther fans right now.
I know, but I think it's going to be similar to last year. We're going to get like a 9-8 winner, but I do think that top part is going to be more competitive. Like maybe 9-8, 9-8, 8-9, maybe 9-8, 8-9, 8-9, something like that between those top 3 teams. But I don't think there's going to be double-digit winners this year. I just don't think any squad is good enough to put up those numbers. And then my second take, which is similar to yours, is that the rookie of the year will come from this division, but I said that it's either going to be Bryce or Bijan Robinson. I think those are by far the 2 best offensive players in the draft. I think they both ended up in pretty good situations. I would say Bijan's situation is probably a lot better. But Bryce's situation for a rookie QB, the number 1 overall pick, no less, is not a horrendous one like we've seen the past few years. So I think he certainly could put up some of those better rookie QB year numbers like Herbert or a Baker Mayfield did a couple like what 5-6 years ago. So yeah, those are my 2 takes. And then all we have now for this division, obviously we have some Panthers talk, but for the division is the division standings prediction. Again,
We're
this is
gonna
our
we're
last
gonna
one of the preseason. Yeah.
we're gonna change some things up. Instead of going top to bottom, we're gonna go bottom to top. And I think we both know who the bottom seller is. How about you break down why you think the Buccaneers are the last place team in the NFC South this year?
Yeah, they're just going to be bad. There's no way around it. Baker Mayfield is not a good QB. I don't think he's an NFL starter at this point in his career. They have aging players at important positions like wide receiver, like in Mike Evans, who a guy that you said could be maybe even gone at the trade deadline to a contender. They have some older players at edge as well, despite bringing in like some young D line talent. Shaq Barrett's getting up there too. I mean, he was on the Broncos in 2015, so
He
it's not
was.
like he's a fresh player either. I think this is a year, like you said, that could be where the coaching staff gets fired. This team should be on Caleb Williams, Drake May, whoever your third QB is. I have Riley Leonard from Duke currently as my third QB for the year. They're on that watch, top three, top four QB watch.
They are. They're one of the bottom rosters in the league. They're a bottom three team in the NFC, which is already a porous conference. It's not looking great for this team. They have a banner, and that's great. It seems like what they do is they pull a championship out of thin air like once every 20 years, and they go back to being the awful franchise that we know the Buccaneers to be. So that seems to be trajectory right now. They're coming down off the down slope, and it's going to be a rough skidding all the way to the bottom this year after being the division winner for the past 3 years now.
I think it's three since Brady was there. I think it's been three, but
So
yeah, I think we have the next two teams switched up. But
yep,
for
but
me,
they
I
are
have
2-3. They are 2-3
they are
for
two
both
and
of us.
three.
So
To be fair, yeah. For me, I have the Saints as the Saints is the next worst team. Uh, Adding Derek Carr just doesn't really move me. And like we were talking about, he's probably a better QB than Andy Dalton at this point in his career. No offense to best backup in the league, Andy Dalton, but I don't know if he's going to be better or more efficient than Dalton was last year. The defense is also aging. That's also an issue for me. And the skill positions that were superstars 4 years ago are also aging. Chris Olave is really exciting, but other than that, they need people like Kendre Miller or Rashid Shaheed to emerge and to, like take really huge steps. And I just don't know if that's going to happen.
I have the Saints finishing second in the division. And the reason why is it kind of goes back to kind of some of the market expectations. This offensive line had a few injuries. I feel like even if Alvin Kamara isn't what he was, adding Jamal Williams, adding Kendre Miller, those guys will be effective in the run game. Chris Olave is the best wide receiver in the NFC South right now. And so when you have a guy like that, it's going to open up the rest of the offense. And it really just comes down to how well do Pete Carmichael and Derek Carr kind of mesh. And if there's fireworks there, they'll ride that to a division title. But there are a lot of concerns with the defense. And if the defense comes out flat, they're very much the third best team in this division, which leads us to your second best team in the division and my third, the Atlanta Falcons. How do you feel about them?
I think so. The first two teams are kind of stagnant to me. They didn't improve too much, and that's why I have them there. One of the big reasons why I have them there. I
And they
think the
lost a lot of
Falcons.
guys too. That was the huge part. They huge
Yes,
losses.
looking at our losses graphic that we'll publish, the Saints and the Bucks comprise what is it, 8 of our top 10 losses to the division. So yeah,
Yep.
huge losses. And this team didn't have any of the losses in our top 10 losses in our division, the Falcons. And I think they also improved tremendously going into year 3 of Arthur Smith. And we know usually year 3 of a head coach's regime is when they try to make their run. I think adding Bijan Robinson to their run-heavy offense is huge. They spent a ton on defense in free agency, which their defense was bad last year, so it was good that they spent on their defense in free agency. But again, it's going to come down to how well Ritter can play for them, and I don't have a ton of faith in him being the guy, and that's why I don't have them at number 1 in the division.
Yeah. The Falcons for me, the biggest concern is that 4 of your 5 starters who are slated to be 4 starters this year all play 99% of the snaps. So they expect that kind of continuity again this year. Probably not going to happen. It could, but if it does, then at that point, it really is on Ritter's shoulder. And it's about making sure he's placing the ball better. Because the issue is that the catches I saw last year when Ritter was a starter, he was putting Drake London in a situation where Drake London had to go up and make a play, and not that the ball was there and then he could go make a play. And I think that's really the biggest step that you want to see from this quarterback is can he just put the ball in his playmaker's hands in the best possible position so they aren't having the ball out just to make a catch, because that's going to be the biggest difference. If he can do that, then this offense is a lot better than it was last year with Mariota. If he can't, I don't really see it improving that much outside of what Bijan is doing in the run game.
That's fair, but even if they don't improve that much, I think the defense improves enough to push them over the Saints. Because we all had the same record last year, all three of the Panthers, Falcons,
We
Saints.
did.
So I think that defensive improvement is enough to push them. But that's going to bring us to the team that I currently have winning the division, the team you currently have winning the division. That's our Carolina Panthers. And I don't think I can understate the amount of improvement that this team, a team that was second in the division last year with Matt Rule's staff and his players, is crazy. The coaching staff is second to none in the league. We said top five earlier. I'm sticking to the second to none rating. That's just me.
Top to
With
bottom, it is hard to argue because, like you said, some of these position coaches, Josh McCown, got a head coaching interview with the Texans guys, and he's third
Mhm.
down on the pecking list in our offensive staff.
Absolutely. He's gotten a head coach interview before. Thomas Brown's gotten head coach interviews before. Ejiro Evero's gotten head coach interviews before. All of those guys will probably be head coach candidates next offseason should this team not bottom out. The free agent signings are also all pretty strong, and I think they're going to gel with the players we already have here. So guys like Von Bell and Shai Tuttle that we mentioned on defense, Hayden Hurst, DJ Chark on offense. And then all of this combined with adding the best QB in the draft, along with some other promising rookie players. Granted, we only had 5 draft picks, but we have guys like Jonathan Mingo, who I know you're really high on, Chandler
Oh yeah.
Zavala, who's been a solid starter for to fill in for Austin Corbett on that right guard spot during the preseason. They should amount to some great improvement for even if they're not starting for depth purposes for the Panthers this season. I think all of this overall, plus the fact that our division is weak enough for a team to sneak in on maybe 8 or 9 wins, I think the Panthers absolutely have a shot at winning the division this year, despite this being the first year of a new regime.
Everybody wants to make the big to do about the Falcons' defensive additions. That's why you have them at two. The Saints' defense, how it's been so good for so long. I just don't see how those groups are better than what we're putting out. And I'm not necessarily saying our interior defensive line is all that. Our secondary depth is obviously very questionable. But when you see some of the pieces and you see who's calling the plays, I think that's what carries this team. I think we have a top 10 defensive unit. I think we have at least an average offense with Bryce Young. I think he is a very competent quarterback at this level. He's going to make the right reads. There's obviously going to be some mistakes and growing pains. We aren't going to go 17-0. I know Jacob jokes about that on the podcast, but it's one of the things that we are going to have a lot more bright spots probably at the end of this year than most of the other teams that we're looking at this division. So when you see where we're at now, where the future is heading, this is probably the brightest team that we have in the NFC South. And that's awesome. That's something we haven't had since really the end of the Cam era, because Matt Rule, that was the medieval times, that was the dark ages, and now we're coming into the Renaissance. And the Renaissance is going to be under Reich and Rice. It's the reason why the title of this episode is the Bryce Age. We're hype on it. We're on the train. Jump on, leave us behind. It doesn't matter. We're going full steam.
Absolutely, and that's why we both have the Panthers winning the division. The rest of the teams don't even matter. Don't even
Nope.
care about that order. And to continue with the Panthers, this is a Panthers pod. We got to talk a little bit about like Panthers current events and stuff. We did have our last preseason game this past weekend, and rather than going into the weeds of everything, I think the main takeaway from that is that we saw what we needed to see. Bryce and the starters on offense played 2 series. We finally got a touchdown from Bryce after our offense struggled versus the Giants and the Jets. Granted, the Giants and Jets, well, the Jets didn't, but the
I
Giants
mean,
played their
Dexter Lawrence
starters.
was putting Bozeman in
Oh
in a
yeah,
cycle. Yeah,
and
he was.
the Jets and Giants defenses were a lot better than what we saw from the Lions, at least the starting unit. And I think we saw what we needed to see, and take that tape, put it to bed, get ready for the regular season. That's my thought on that game.
Absolutely. I'm so hoping the reason why we were in 11 personnel is that some of the wrinkles Reich's going to bring in starting week one are going to be some of those 12 personnel looks. Are we running it? Are we going to play some play action off of it? And that could open up some great plays on this offense that we didn't get to see this preseason, which is okay with me. Like when it really counts, that's when you want to see it. So cut day is today. We already lost Jake Luton, Cameron Peoples, Gary Jennings. I wasn't a big fan of Gary Jennings and his Lions performance. I think that's why he went when he did. Bumper Pool was cut. Rajon Wright, cornerback, a guy that we thought maybe could make the 53. Kobe Jones got cut. Deion Jones, man. Deion Jones, Brandon Smith. We talked about this earlier. I actually thought I wasn't big on the signing of him at the beginning, and you reminded me earlier the day before we hopped on this podcast is that he was a camp body that he was brought in
Mhm.
just to kind of boost the unit. We have a really strong core. Like you said, it's probably the best we've seen since the Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis era. And so that's exciting to see. It really is. What are some of the kind of the three guys that you think out of who we cut, and we'll probably get into a few more of these guys that we cut that you think will make the practice squad that will be potentially good role players later in the season if there are injuries to the starters?
I think the big one's going to be Kobe Jones, right? I mean, we saw him in person, devastating in camp, like devastating opposing alignment in camp. Had a really good camp. He kind of settled down during the second preseason game. I don't think he played the third preseason game, but he kind of cooled down. But he was a guy that I know a lot of fans, us included, were pretty high on. Spencer Brown as another guy because we don't really have that bruiser back, and that's what he was during he's been on our team for a couple years now on the practice squad. He got some run at the end of last year, had a touchdown in the Lions game. He's just a good bruiser back, something we need. I even thought that it might have been a long shot that he made it over Chuba, but Chuba's not a high draft pick, but a fourth round pick, and I guess they wanted his services still. And then Jordan Thomas is a guy that is kind of less known than the other two. He played both tight end and outside backer in the XFL. He was mainly an edge rusher for us, but I think he's a guy that would be interesting to see on the practice squad because of his athletic profile and what he's able to do in multiple ways, multiple positions.
Absolutely. I think the first one for me, and I was a little shocked. I was hoping he would take a step in year two. He showed some promise last year. You really liked him, and that's Keith Taylor. We needed cornerback depth, and I really thought we were going to get it from him. He looked awful in that Lions game. I'm going to be honest. I didn't like what I saw from him, and I think that's a big part of the reason why he didn't make the 53. We also don't have bumper pool, which again, linebacker depth. That's okay. It's a guy that I think if he stays on the practice squad could be impactful, like say next year. And it just depends on if a team like the Texans or somebody else that has Alabama ties or knows what bumper pool is about pulls them. And we'll see in the coming days. The other pick is Deontay Brown, big boy, big boy. Where we're talking about
Hmm.
guard help and
Unit.
stuff. Exactly. And it's one of those things that if we can keep him around on the practice squad and we can just have a big body on the offensive line, if for some reason Corbett, Zavala, some of these guys start going down, that we have another guy that we can throw in there that can be serviceable.
True. And we just passed the cut deadline earlier in the pod as we're recording. I have the 53 here in front of me, and I'm going to run some things by you and kind of get your reaction. Um,
Okay.
so if we're ready, there were three cuts that needed to happen once we started recording, and I put them all three down here in the script. You'll notice that one of them's in italics there. Go ahead and read off who that is for me and kind of your reaction on this player being cut.
So I saw this tweet because I knew this section was coming up. We saved when we recorded because we knew when we got to this point the final cuts would be released. The first one was a guy that we thought could be an adequate swing tackle, and I think it's going to come down. I really want Brady Christensen to be the swing tackle. Honest to goodness, like that
Hmm.
is. We talked about this earlier. If Corbett comes back, you slide Zavala over the left guard to play right next to Icky, and you have Christensen as a tackle that can either fill in for Moten or hopefully Icky if either Icky continues to regress the way he has been or he gets injured. But Cam Irving, I haven't said his name. Cam Irving is the guy that got cut. He has looked awful this preseason. Hasn't necessarily been the best starter when he's been given the opportunity, and I can understand the cut here. The other
Get him
two
out of
guys,
here. Am I right?
the other
Yeah.
two guys, yeah, go for it. I
They're
wasn't as familiar with these guys, so I think this was
yeah.
more of a fair.
These are just they've been depth guys for the preseason. Greg Maben, the corner, and Taylor Stallworth at defensive tackle. Yeah, just depth guys. I feel like guys that were going to be cut, and they did end up being cut, and that is unfortunate. And hopefully they're able to catch on a practice squad or another roster somewhere. But I think the big one for these final three was Cam Irving, and I'm looking at the 53 right now. We currently have 8 O linemen, 5 who we'd expect, like the starters. Then we also have Nash Jensen and Cade Mays, 2 guys on the interior that we thought could make it. Nash Jensen, a UDFA from, I believe, North Dakota State. I think he's played the most games as a starter in FCS history. He's a
There
guy
you
that's
go.
really impressed this offseason. And then the third tackle that we currently have is Ricky Lee. Now, I don't know too much about him, but he must have impressed to make it over a guy like Cam Irving, who was I think he was a top 15 pick in his draft. He's been in the league like 10 years. I'm just glad Cam Irving and Michael Jordan are gone. They just seem to have like a bad juju around them, bad energy, always negative. And just they don't produce on the field. And I'm glad that we've moved on from them there. Another thing I wanted to throw by you. So we currently have now the full 53 is always in flux, right? Until next Tuesday. That's
It
really when you
is.
hammer down the 53 that you're going to be
It's
taking to game
usually
one.
It's usually, and I retweeted a graphic from a guest on the show, Joseph Hefner. You can check it out on my page at Patent Analytics or at his. I think he's Joseph Heffy on Twitter. But it pretty much shows that, like, from the final 53 that we're seeing this Tuesday to when we start the actual NFL season, there's usually about 2 or 3 guys that'll switch. So expect
Hmm.
a little bit, like you said, a little bit transition. There's injuries, or maybe they do cut and grab a guy, like you said, off another team that'll kind of make the 53.
Right. So because like 1,000-ish players became available today, I think it's reasonable to expect that there's going to be at least 2 to 3 guys that change around between now and next Tuesday. But with that in mind, I wanted to run by you that we currently have 7 receivers on our 53 and 5 tight ends. So for the receivers, we have DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall, Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, Laviska Shenault. We traded for Amir Smith Marset this morning, or it
And
might have been
a
late
guy
last
that
night.
you called after training
Yep.
camp.
Called it. Derek Wright is currently on the 53. I hope he sticks until next week. He's a guy that just had a ton of rapport with Bryce Young, and you need that for your rookie QB. You want a guy that he trusts, and he's a guy that was able to play the slot, play a little bit outside. So I'm really excited with that. And I also wanted to touch on the Smith Marset trade. He's a guy coming out of Iowa. That's like maybe the only real Iowa receiver ever. He's a huge burner. He can play all 3 positions. Good returner as well. I think he's going to
Which
bring
will
a
be
ton of
huge.
value. Yeah, exactly. And I think if we do end up cutting one of these receivers, it's going to be between Wright and Chenault. And I honestly would prefer that we keep Wright. I think we've seen the limits of what Chenault can do. He's not really a
I guess
downfield route
the
runner.
biggest
Yeah,
thing with Chenault is that you have like a few big plays throughout the season where he's going to get 20 plus yards. And so that's
right.
always nice. And you wonder if Derek Wright has that in the bag. But exactly like you said, the consistency, the route running is not there.
Well, what I think is that now this isn't like a negative comp by any means, but I think Jonathan Mingo is a guy who can do a lot of what Chenault can do, and he did that a lot at Ole Miss. He lined up in the
He
wing, which
did.
is something you don't
Wide
see a
receiver
ton from receivers.
screens.
I think,
Yep.
and with
There's
his body type, he's the guy that can take a screen or something and like knock over a few guys and get like 5 or 10 extra yards. So I think there might be a bit of redundancy there, and I would obviously prefer to keep Mingo, and I know you would too over Chenault. Yeah, we currently have 5 tight ends as well. Hayden Hurst, Ian Thomas, Tommy Trimble, Steven Sullivan, and Giovanni Ricci. We know that Reich likes the tight ends. I don't know about keeping 5 on the roster though, because we currently only have 4 corners as well. So I
we
think that
we
when they
may end
bring
up
in
cutting one
corner
of
depth,
those tight
yeah,
ends and sign a cornerback. And that's probably
yeah.
where you want to see cuts if we're going to bring in 2 or 3 new guys with all these new players now available.
Absolutely. The last kind of thing I wanted to touch on here, other than currently only have 4 corners, it's JC, Dante, CJ Henderson, and Troy Hill listed. We will be bringing in corner depth. I'm not concerned about that at all. But the last thing I really wanted to touch on with the 53 is that there are currently 6 outside backers slash edge rushers listed. Those are Burns, YGM, Marquise Haynes, Justin Houston, DJ Johnson, and Mari Barno, like all people we expected, right? And
Yep.
then for the defensive line, now I know this was a big topic because we cut people like Marquan McCall, Raekwon Williams, people we thought could be on that, like be that starting nose tackle. So,
McCall had health concerns. He didn't pass his
mhm.
physical in New England. That was a large reason why we saw him depart. I think otherwise he would have been a phenomenal nose tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And Raekwon Williams was a guy that I was high on. A couple beat writers were high on, but he did end up being cut today. So for our defensive line, there are 5 people listed. 4 listed as defensive tackle, one is defensive end, but they're all going to be between that 5 and 3 tech spot, in my opinion. We have Derek Brown, Shy Tuttle, Deshaun Williams. Those are the obvious ones. And then the other two are Nick Thurman, a guy who was able to play 5 tech and 3 tech. He's shown a bit in camp. I didn't know too much about him, so I had to look up some of his camp stuff. And then LaBryan Ray, a former Alabama defensive tackle. He had that sack. He actually, for the Patriots last preseason, sacked, I believe it was Darn or Matt Corral in the back of the end zone, and he also had a sack versus the Giants when we played them this season. So he stuck to the 53 as well. So we have like 11-ish edge and defensive line guys, which I think is a good amount. But other than
It
that, like
is.
I'm pretty content with the roster. I would like a some corner depth, and I think that'll come at the expense of a tight end or receiver, and then a bruiser back would be nice. But other than that, like I think the 53 looks pretty good.
Yeah. Now, during the break between the preseason and regular season, we're going to have a special predictions episode next week. We'll go over our picks to different awards, playoff predictions, as well as more dubious predictions like worst teams. So stay tuned for how the season shakes out.